Good morning and welcome to our investment value add session, the rise and rise of trust-based philanthropy. Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge country, and I'm calling from the Gadigal country of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. And yeah, we will kick off. So welcome today. It's been a little while since we've been in touch, but very excited to be able to deliver this session to you. We've got a lot of content to get through, so we will move right along. So today what we're going to cover off is some high-level commentary around some of those mega trends that we're seeing in sector. We're going to deep dive a little bit into specifically fundraising trends that we're seeing. I'll then capture some commentary around what trust-based philanthropy is, but also some of the trends that we're seeing with our major donors and our active philanthropists, and some of those key things to think about when engaging with that cohort. There will be time for Q&A at the end. So please feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A box, and we will cover those at the end of today's session. We are recording, so we will be sharing this with you at the end of today. So setting the scene. So what are some of those mega trends that we're seeing? And again, none of this content today should be new. This is stuff that is present. We might know it anecdotally, but it's very there for us. But today it's all about bringing that information together. So I've got three buckets: the economy, individuals, and data. And all of this impacts our work with active philanthropists and major donors. So we can't ignore it, but obviously the cost of living crisis is very present, not only for in the fundraising space. We are seeing that it is impacting on fundraising revenue. People aren't, discretionary income isn't as available as interest rates increase, and the grocery shop is much more expensive. But I think on the flip side, major donors are recognizing that the cost of living is making life harder for everyday Australians. And we are seeing that that reflected in our philanthropists, and understanding that they actually need to do more to help ease the burden. And some of the stats around food insecurity, homelessness, domestic violence, it's very scary, and that is being recognised by philanthropists. It is a challenging income environment as well. So economically, interest rates, the stock market, we are seeing the impact, and you would have heard from Parman and from Grant Mundell that it is going to be a more challenging income environment, and that also will be reflected in the structured giving vehicles that we manage. Income will be a little bit lower. So that is something to factor in when looking at budgets for the next 12 to 18 months. In terms of individuals, intergenerational wealth transfer, the numbers have been thrown around for a long time now, 3.5 trillion before 2050, and that's in Australia alone. The numbers in the US are much, much higher, and that's the reality and the opportunity for us in terms of fundraising and accessing major donors. The other thing that's quite interesting from a mega trends point of view is actually our aging population, which obviously feeds into our intergenerational transfer, but the number of those that are aging that are also child-free. So I think there was a report that came out from Legacy Foresight explaining that the number of requests from child-free families is going to significantly increase. So definitely something we're also seeing in terms of the number of families approaching us about starting structured giving vehicles. Many of them are without children, and looking at alternatives to handing their wealth down to the next generation. So really, it's definitely one of those trends to be watching. And the third area that I really wanted to talk about today is data. We are seeing so much data. It's so fragmented, and there is volume. So it's being able to cut through that volume with fundraising messages, and understanding how our cohorts and our community are consuming that data. We've seen anecdotally a lot more of our community are feeding back and saying, "Are you a scam? You're asking, you've just sent us an email that is that a scam?" And so there's a heightened sense of awareness because of this additional communication volume. And the other thing about data is that it is coming across multiple channels. And that will also change as we start dealing with the next generation. So data is no longer just via email or via the internet. It's via channels like TikTok and social media and ChatGPT, and there's so many. There's videos and there's all sorts of channels that we're working across, and it's understanding how our consumers and how our stakeholders are consuming that data and adjusting that as our donors age, as next generation come through, and they're wanting data in different formats. Just on that conversation around the internet generation transfer of wealth, this graph is currently in the Blueprint to Grow Structured Giving report that came out from Philanthropy Australia last year. The data is actually collated by Seer Data, and I think it's really demonstrative of just the volume that we're going to be seeing in the next couple of years, and really that opportunity, which is super exciting from our perspective. Last week, I was privileged to attend the Philanthropy Meets Parliament Summit in Canberra, and it was really a great opportunity to reconnect with the sector, but also understand where the sector's at and where government's at in terms of philanthropy and increasing the capacity of philanthropy to support our community sector. And really the highlights from the summit were that government is, and we've seen Andrew Lee talk at numerous events, and he's really our advocate in this area, which is fantastic to see. But they're really focusing on reconnecting communities. They're talking and active around the recovery post-COVID. And really for them, it's about reconnecting and recreating the link between philanthropy, government, and charities. And so we've seen the start of a bit of reform. The Productivity Commission report should be out in the next couple of weeks, their first draft report. And we really would encourage everyone to, and we'll probably do a bit of a summary paper around that in terms of some of those initial outcomes that have come and some of the recommendations that they are proposing. During last week's summit, there was a lot of discussion around Philanthropy Australia's proposal around unlocking giving within super. So that is super exciting to see, and hopefully it is reviewed by government for consideration. And there were a lots of discussion around making it easier to give, and that has there was a lot of discussions about making it easier to get DGR1 status, which will be, I think, a welcome news for many smaller and startup charities that we're seeing. But yeah, we're big advocates of making it easier so that we can grow structured giving by 2030. And there was definite agreement about we need a double giving, but we also need a double impact, which is so critical. And there was lots of case studies around really successful collaborations between government and philanthropy. So the Australian Investment Dialogue for Australia's Children was one of those examples. And it's really positive to see government and philanthropy working together to support our community. And I think one of the overarching themes we saw last week was really the power of storytelling. And if you've spoken to me in the recent past, you know that I'm a really big advocate. It's all about the narrative. That is what grounds our work, and we will be talking a little bit more about that today. So very quickly, and we will share these slides so you will be able to analyze these graphs in a little bit more detail. But effectively, the next few slides really demonstrates that giving has recovered post-COVID. So here are some of the reports that have come out of John McLeod's recent report. We always love JB Weir's analysis, but really donations have started to creep back up post-COVID, which is fantastic. We are seeing that the proportion of taxpayers claiming donations has dropped a little bit, but those that are giving are more generous, which is wonderful. What's really fascinating, and it's come out in the 9th edition of the ACNC report, is that of the 59,000 registered charities in Australia, 19% of them are grant makers, which is really interesting to see. So private ancillary funds, public ancillary funds, and other trusts being predominantly perpetual charitable trusts, which, as you know, here at Equity Trustees is our bread and butter. This was a report that came out from the QUT, Australian Centre for Philanthropy and Non-Profit Studies. So this is an analysis of ancillary funds from 2001 through to 2021. So you can really see here the growth of structured giving. So structured giving being that public and private ancillary funds. And you can see in the total value column, 11 billion in assets in the private ancillary fund world and 4 billion in assets in public ancillary funds. So as many of you know, we very much play in the public ancillary fund space. So this number, we're one of those public ancillary funds, and we really are seeing a growth in public ancillary fund sub-funds as being a very accessible way of accessing structured giving. And we really see that as the opportunity to democratise philanthropy for all Australians. This is a really interesting, the next few slides are really focusing on fundraising specifically. So the team at More Strategic are a fabulous consultancy based here in Sydney. They do have representation all along the East Coast. And I've borrowed Martin's slides here because I think it provides a really interesting insight in terms of fundraising investment. And for those of you on the call who are on investment committees, you will probably have seen this reflected in the ask from your leadership team. But we really see, and this graph on the left demonstrating where the returns are is quite fascinating. So we have seen an upward trend in terms of investment, but also return in terms of focusing on major donors, focusing on trust and foundation, but also bequests. And we've really seen that upward trend of investment across all of our beneficiary clients as well as our mandate clients. So, and here on the right-hand side, just in terms of the index salary investments, we see that, again, the focus on major donors, trust and foundation, and bequests in terms of some of those return on investment numbers. The next slide here is also, again, a really good summary of those trends in terms of the rate of growth of fundraising costs, but also in terms of income. So we're really seeing bequests over here on the right, major donors, a little bit less in terms of growth, but definitely from an income perspective, very strong. And direct marketing still is a significant investment, but not necessarily the rate of return that we're seeing in some of the other areas. So moving along to trust-based philanthropy, if you've spoken to me in the last couple of months, This is something we really truly live and breathe here at Equity Trustees. And it was something that I think has gathered momentum in the last few years in the philanthropic sector. And really, I think there was momentum driven by COVID-19. So during COVID-19, philanthropy, Equity Trustees, along with a number of our co-grant makers in the sector, signed up to the Philanthropy Pledge, which really was a commitment to all the tenets of trust-based philanthropy. But really at the very heart of trust-based philanthropy are the tenets of advancing equity, shifting the power imbalance that currently exists between grantees and grantors, and really ultimately building mutually accountable relationships between the two parties. And fundamentally, it is all about shared values, and that is something we really truly live and breathe here at Equity Trustees. So in order for trust-based philanthropy to work, there has to be humility, there has to be transparency, there has to be collaboration, there's got to be conversation and dialogue, and there's got to be mutual learning. And so trust-based philanthropy is a part of our everyday conversation with philanthropists. But the reality is that all of the families we work with, and there's over 380 of those now, they sit right across that spectrum. I wish everyone was at the far right in terms of trust-based philanthropy subject matter experts, but the reality is that they all sit at different points of that spectrum. Some of our families are giving very much ad hoc. Some are at that multi-year level. Some are still giving tie grants. Some are giving in capacity. And some don't engage at all, and others engage 3 or 4 times a year with their chosen beneficiaries. And our job is to take this cohort on that journey so that they over time will engage a little bit more every year in terms of the foundational principles of trust-based philanthropy. It's really interesting though, many of our clients give untied and give to general charitable purpose, and they're almost trust-based philanthropists by accident, because they are giving based on their values, and they do believe in the organizations they fund, and they're very comfortable giving untied giving, and so they're accidental trust-based philanthropists, which is not a bad thing either. So what are the 6 practices of trust-based philanthropy? So first and foremost, multi-year unrestricted funding, which is the gold at the end of all of our fundraising rainbows, and is definitely something, as a former fundraiser myself, it's what we aspire to. Research and due diligence is the next tenet of trust-based philanthropy, putting the ball in the court of the funder and putting the onus on them to do their research, understand the beneficiary, and make that decision and go through that decision-making process of building that trust and determining whether or not the beneficiary is someone that they want to support. And not necessarily asking the beneficiary to jump through all the hoops in order to secure that funding. The third tenet of trust-based philanthropy is about simplifying and streamlining paperwork. And that's definitely something that we promoted during COVID-19. And it is something that is ongoing, definitely reporting back, but not necessarily maybe with the reams and reams of acquittal paperwork that might have previously been required. Being transparent and responsive, whether that's about outcomes not being reached, or potentially just understanding what are the needs of the beneficiary. Communication is key. The 5th tenet of trust-based philanthropy is around soliciting and acting on feedback. It's about a two-way conversation. It's about understanding what's going on, and the feedback loop going both ways, and that's definitely something we advocate for. And finally, offering support beyond the grant. As we know, philanthropy is about more than just money. It's about time, it's about talent, it's about ties. So potentially opening up a grant makers network to the chosen beneficiary. So it's about understanding what are the needs of the beneficiary are and how else we can help. So what we are about to cover off now is some of the trends that we've seen over the last 6 to 12 months. And we've summarized this by in terms of 2 areas, giving trends, but also stewardship considerations. So let me first cover off giving trends. We are definitely seeing increase greater numbers considering untied and capacity funding. Interestingly, as I mentioned before, a lot of our clients are accidental trust-based philanthropists. More than 80% are funding general charitable purposes. And that's because they've identified an organization that pulls on their heartstrings, that is a values alignment, and there is a shared commitment to solving whatever is the problem at hand. What we're also finding is a lot of our clients might say, I want my donation to go to a specific program. So it might be that a program in a particular school, but then they'll actually allow the organization to spend that money as they see fit. But fundamentally, it still relies on the client having done their research and understanding, yep, there's a fit here. I love what they do. I believe in their theory of change. And then saying, hey, I trust you to use the funds as you see and how it best suits. So yeah, as I mentioned, a lot of my clients are accidental pay what it takes advocates. And so they're not necessarily saying you have to spend it on this or you have to spend it on that. They're just trusting that the organization will do what it needs to do in order to reach the outcomes as discussed. There are admittedly some families that are still very much focused on, I want to fund an organization that has low overhead. So I want to ensure my donation is efficient from that point of view. And the conversation we often have with our clients is, well, what type of impact? So turning the conversation away from overheads and talking about impact and saying to our funders, is this donation going to help them deliver on the impact as opposed to having a conversation around overheads? The unfortunate thing is there will always be families that are committed to that. And sometimes it's about acknowledging that and moving on to the next philanthropist that is willing to have a conversation around untied and capacity funding. Multi-year funding, we are definitely seeing an increase of families supporting their chosen beneficiaries on a multi-year basis. Again, it comes down to a trust-based relationship. They've done their due diligence. They have seen evidence that their donation is making impact, and they're willing to commit to have that impact continued. And we definitely see multi-year relationships coming out of strong stewardship, good connection, and seeing their impact come to life, whether that be via stories, via videos, via site visits. We really do see multi-year relationships coming out of strong engagement. There is the next box is heart, then head. It's as much as data is important, as much as impact and measurement and evaluation is critical, and we can never do away with that, that heart connection will always be fundamental to our philanthropists. They will first make that connection through their heart before they do the evaluation via data and measurement. And that connection to cause, that connection to value is what we always need to keep top of mind in terms of to create that initial engagement in order for the data to follow. Intersectionality is definitely one of the newer trends that we've seen, and it's really that conversation around there is no there is never one lens to any social issue. The example I love demonstrating is that a funder might fund international development, but there's going to be a lens of gender on that funding. There's going to be a lens of climate on that funding, and potentially Indigenous as well, for any Indigenous peoples that might be in that realm. And so it's about understanding what those intersections are, because potentially it might actually open up some additional opportunities from a fundraising perspective, particularly as we see greater focus in the sector around funding for gender, funding for climate, funding for First Nations, and my conversation with philanthropists is that the donors may want to go, oh, well, there's all this hype around needing to fund climate and meeting the climate crisis and needing to fund gender. But my conversation with them is actually have a look at who you're funding already, because chances are there will be an intersection of some of those other themes. And it means that you don't need to do a complete 180 in terms of your granting strategy, but with a little bit of a pivot, chances are you'll actually realize that you're already funding climate action or you're already funding gender in a completely different area of focus. So intersectionality is fascinating, and I think will be a really interesting conversation with major donors over the next couple of months and years. Collaboration, we've been talking about collaboration for probably the entire time I've been at Equity Trustees, but we are definitely seeing greater evidence, and we talked about it last week at Philanthropy Meets Parliament, but the need for organisations to work together to solve some of those big, hairy social issues out there. No one organisation is ever going to solve the problem, so we need to work together and aggregate our resources. The other element of collaboration is we're really seeing a greater onus on lived experience. So ensuring that the work that's happening in sector is actually reflective of what the beneficiaries require, and ensuring that there's always the lived experience voice in all decision making at a governance level, at a frontline level. And we're really encouraging clients to analyze an organization based on is the voice of the client in and amongst the organization. And my last box under giving trends is strategic focus. We are seeing more and more of our active philanthropists preparing a giving strategy, understanding what are some of those key areas that they want to focus on, recognizing they can't do everything. And many are taking a bit of a narrower focus, but also much deeper in some of the issues that they're passionate about. And as always, values alignment is something that we're always advocating for, and is absolutely critical in terms of grounding a giving strategy. So in terms of stewardship, I harp on about this all the time. And there's a couple of considerations that must be taken into play in the current environment. Economic impacts, we talked about it as a megatrend. It's a reality. It's more costly to live out there. The wonderful thing about structured giving is that in most cases, the corpus is retained for our clients. The giving on a year-on-year basis might be a little bit less because of economic impacts, but the quantum is going to be fairly intact, which is great. And we are seeing major donors continuing to add to their structures. So we did still see a lot of top-ups during the year, but there were one or two families that said to me, hey, we're actually needing to support our next generation to buy a house, to pay fund their deposit. The parental bank was definitely being leveraged. So we did see a few of those that feedback last financial year. And we definitely obviously know that for those giving outside of their structured giving vehicles, discretionary income has dropped, and therefore the tax time giving, Christmas, community events, we have seen a decrease in fundraising income there. As mentioned before, FY24 dividend incomes will be much softer compared to previous years. So some of that is also factoring into some of our cash flow analysis. And it is just something that we need to be aware of in terms of impacts on fundraising budgets over the next few months and years. One of the things that we've introduced here at Equity Trustees is dropping the seed amount of structured giving vehicles from 20,000 to 5. So for us, that's really about making philanthropy more available to the everyday person. So we are seeing more clients sign up, which is very exciting to see. And we're really hoping to grow the number of people who are giving during their lifetime. So my next box is right sizing. And what I mean for that is right sizing stewardship for the clients depending on their time of life. And this is fundraising 101. We recognize that fundraising resources are stretched. There are not enough major donor fundraisers on the ground working and trying to build those trust-based relationships. So it's about understanding where are some of those efficiencies that we can create in order to maintain that stewardship, understanding that good stewardship leads to multi-year trust-based relationships. And the other thing about stewardship for those in structured giving vehicles is that some of these guys may only be giving $5,000 or $6,000 a year to your organisation, but they're also in perpetual structures, which means that you'll get $5,000 every single year, potentially forever. So based on really good stewardship, you could potentially have a major donor, a lifetime donor who actually acts like a mid-value donor on a year-to-year basis. So it's some of those understandings. And as you guys know, reach out to get a better understanding of the clients that might be giving, because we can give you an indication of what type of giver the family might be. Again, it's about being efficient with the use of resources. I'm a big fan of reusing collateral, leveraging collateral, using videos and content that could be replicated across multiple donors, and also understanding that site visits and face-to-face engagement isn't actually attractive to some of our families. And as I've said this numerous times before, when you've met one family, you've met one family, and its stewardship's going to look different across that spectrum. But relationships, while they take time to nurture, once that deep connection is made, it's amazing how committed and static a client and sticky, that a client will be. And the number of clients that in our structure that have recurring plans, and basically every single year, the money that's available will go to the same organization, and that's because a connection has been created, and based on values, based on relationships. So we definitely see evidence of that every single day. Communication, and back to the mega trend that I mentioned earlier, there is so much data. Our clients are being bombarded by data and a volume of content every single day. So it is understanding how do we create balance? How do we not overwhelm our clients with too much information, understanding that your organization may not be the only organization they're hearing from. So it is all about balance. And for many of our clients, many of you on the call speak to Equity and seeking introductions to some of our families. And for some of our families, they may not know your brand. They may not know who you are from it and another. And so one of the things that we constantly talk about is painting that picture and crafting that narrative to demonstrate, well, why should you give to us? Why are we different from everyone else? And a lot of the collateral needs to be slightly different in that you need to actually, there's an organizational branding piece that needs to be done before you start talking about the impact. They need to understand who you are as an organization, have that heart connection, and then be able to hear more. So we often will talk about a 1-pager or sometimes a 2-pager. And really it's that high-level executive summary for us to be able to introduce your organization to a family that may not know who you are. So it's really about some of that high-level communication. And then once we've created that, open that door a little bit, we can then follow through with additional collateral and information that might be specific to that donor. And again, I've said it numerous times today, narrative is absolutely key. It's knowing your why, being able to articulate and sharing it well, and being able to talk about, and we often will say, talk about the problem that you're trying to solve for, talk about the solution that you're seeking to deliver with the support of philanthropy, and then what are some of those results that come out of that solution. And finally, succession. We are definitely seeing the next generation come through in a lot of our structured giving vehicles. A lot of our founders are starting to bring through their children and even their grandchildren, having conversations around philanthropy and what that means. The interesting thing is we're seeing a real mix of next G2, generation 2, honouring the wishes and the cause areas of their generation 1 of the founders. But in the same token, we also see a number of generation 2 deviating slightly. So they may maybe focus a small percentage of the giving on what their parents would have wanted to give to, but others are then taking the philanthropy on their own journey and giving to causes special to them. So it's a real mix of being able to understand what that, where the opportunity is and whether or not there's an opportunity to secure generation 2's interest based on the legacy giving of generation 1. The other trend that we're also seeing is a lot of families are approaching us that don't have a generation 2, and they're effectively going, hey, I don't really want to distribute my wealth to nieces and nephews, and I want my legacy to have an impact. So they're coming to us seeking a solution, which is a structured giving vehicle. And again, engagement then is a bit different for someone that is needing to make a decision during their lifetime, then putting wishes in place for us as trustee to execute. So again, that stewardship is extra critical in the phase while they're still with us to almost lock it in terms of your beneficiary being nominated as the ongoing beneficiary beyond their lifetime. And probably the last piece around succession is back to our conversation around data and how people consume data, is that different generations consume communication channels in very different ways. And it's understanding that and again, right-sizing that stewardship to the cohort. Okay, so going okay for time, so we will kick on. I wanted to cover off a slide around what motivates our families, and I've put the quote up there, when you've met one family, you've met one family. And I've been doing this now for 5.5 years, and it never it surprises me every single time I speak to a new family that it's completely different. But giving is always grounded in stories and people's experiences and values, and you would obviously expect that it's going to be different. But there are 5 areas that I'm going to talk about now that really are the reason why people give will be grounded in one of these 5. So I'll quickly go through some of those now. So the organization, there will always be families that go, I love your brand. You've been around forever. I've known you since I was a child. Of course, I'm going to give to you. On the flip side, they'll go, hey, you're an up and coming startup. I love what you're doing. I'm going to support you. And there might be a values alignment with the organization. It might be about the fact that it's where they're located. It's that geography piece. It's a mission alignment with the philanthropist, which might draw them in, or potentially the fact that they're grassroots on the ground doing that, the stuff at the bottom of the hill as opposed to the fence at the top of the hill. All of those things, but the organization is sometimes what drives a philanthropist to give. My second box is people. So I've got many families that they give because of the CEO, or they give because of the founder, because of the leader that is driving that organization and driving that mission. And that's who they're connected to and why they give. There is sometimes a risk there is that if the founder or that person leaves, then that philanthropist also leaves. So that is something that comes into play when philanthropists are giving to the people. The people may also be not just the beacon, the lighthouse, but also maybe some of those key people within the organization. So it might be a researcher, it might be the program leader, but again, the philanthropist will be for that person as opposed to the organization. Of course, programs and services, that's a bit of a no-brainer. People will often be aligned to a specific program or service, and that's what they fall in love with. And they're agnostic about who's delivering it. It's actually the program that drives, and it might be a mentorship program or a particular type of scholarship, or it might be the food truck or the social enterprise that's delivering the service. And often philanthropists, and that's really where that tied income piece comes in, that they're really funding that project because that's actually where they connect. The ideas is the fourth bucket I've put there. And here, I mean, it's that theory of change. So a lot of philanthropists will actually latch onto a particular innovative idea or a particular way of delivering a service. And that's actually what motivates them to give. It's a unique way of responding to a problem, or potentially it might be that influence of lived experience that really connects them to that cause and that organization. And it's that innovation piece that they're funding, and that's the link. And the last piece is about place. A lot of my families are in a particular location. They do want to fund place-based. They do want to fund in their local community, and that's what motivates them as opposed to a particular organisation that they might come across. And finally, I know a number of you would have seen this slide previously, but in general, these are some of the things that come into consideration once the motivation box has been ticked. Other things that might come into play are obviously things like, well, are they eligible to receive funds from the family? Does the organisation have a good understanding of the sector, of the problem, and is the solution right size for that problem? Is there opportunity to collaborate? What's the potential impact? What's the beneficiary reach of the project, of the organisation? What is the governance structures in place for the organisation? Are they sustainable? And there's always what I call the X factor. There are just some times where there will be no identifiable reason why a philanthropist gives to an organization. Sometimes it's just that X factor that exists. So often we will say that philanthropy is more art than science sometimes, which can be frustrating if you're a grant seeker, but it is, and we try to be as transparent as we can and share with you what we know, but sometimes there is no reason why an organisation has been chosen. Okay, home stretch. Oops, there you go. I really wanted to just quickly cover off what is happening behind the scenes here at Equity and how we support our philanthropists. And then we will leave a little bit of time for questions. So what is our ecosystem here at Equity Trustees? So there are, obviously, from a philanthropy perspective, there are many ways that organisations receive money. You might get a direct gift, tax time, Christmas appeals, fundraising campaigns, community events, galas, and obviously bequest and gifts in wills are another area of fundraising income. But where Equity Trustees plays is really in that space of structured philanthropy. So where amounts are invested and invested in a structure, we invest that money, we generate an income, and a proportion of that income is distributed to DGR1 and charitable causes on an annual basis. We don't usually touch the corpus, so over time that corpus builds. We continue to give money away into perpetuity. This is a familiar slide to some of you, but really I think demonstrates how many different structures are out there. So it's not just things like public ancillary funds and private ancillary funds. Community foundations are really growing in popularity in Australia, and hopefully they will also achieve DGR1 status in the next few months. We have corporate foundations, which are probably a little bit more accessible than ancillary funds. We have family offices. We've got other charitable trusts. The world of philanthropy is immense, but we really play in these three areas here in terms of public ancillary funds, private ancillary funds, and will trusts or perpetual charitable trusts. So for many of you, you would know that, so last year we distributed 122 million and that's a combination of both Equity Trustees giving as well as Australian Executor Trustees. So we acquired Australian Executor Trustees in December last year, and it's been fantastic to be able to support the families that have come across from AET. In the combined total of the active families that we're supporting is 385, thereabouts. But as a collective, we're looking after about 800 trusts. So that's across all the different products of ancillary funds as well as perpetual charitable trusts. And currently, that should have a little B after the 4.8 billion. So that's 4.8 billion under management by Grant Mundell and Parman's team in asset management. So in the philanthropy trustees, philanthropy team at Equity Trustees, we're split across 4 different areas. So we look after a significant portfolio of native title trusts, predominantly in Brisbane, South Australia and Perth. We have what we call our charitable trust team, which predominantly looks after our perpetual charitable trusts where there's an advisory committee or a board of co-trustees. Active philanthropy team is us in terms of ancillary funds, and the social impact team are really our team that looks after perpetual charitable trusts where Equity is sole trustee. Oops. There you go. And for some of you on the call, you would be familiar with our Empowering Change program, but I did want to quickly highlight it today in terms of about 5 years ago, we did a review of all of our perpetual charitable trusts where we had discretion and sort of tried to understand where the themes were. And these are the 6 themes that came out of that analysis. And we have a program manager attached to each of these areas, and they're in charge of looking after a portfolio of trusts who are granting in this space and really trying to create impact where we can, recognizing that we can't do everything. We do have a limited amount of money to give away in these particular areas, but where can we make the greatest impact in our area of influence? So there's going to be a little bit of a tweak around some of these pillars in the next couple of months, and we will bring everyone together again and talk you through some of those changes. But these areas are what we've been doing for the last 5 years, and there's been some incredible impact created, as you can see by the funding numbers that are on screen. And just to highlight some of the logos that we are very proud to be trustee for, many of these will be very familiar to the team: Vertel, Felton, Ansett, William Buckland. And our role in all of these trusts is to support the trustees where there is a co-trustee, and really provide strategic advisory support around both investments as well as the granting that is coming out of each of these perpetual charitable trusts. Just going to very quickly, and we've spoken a lot about this already today, but these are the three main structures that we operate in. So Public Ancillary Fund Subfund, which we're very excited that we've introduced a lower seed amount of $5,000, which was $20,000 previously. And this is realistically where most of our new clients are starting. So really providing an opportunity for Australia to be involved in philanthropy, and it's our contribution to doubling structure giving by 2030. Private Ancillary Fund, we do recommend that these, the starting amount is $1 million, mainly because of the governance and compliance costs that sit behind this structure. But definitely we are seeing a few families coming through seeking more information about private ancillary funds. And the third structure that is, again, equity trustees, our bread and butter, is trusts that are set up via the will. A little bit of extra scope in terms of those families that are wanting to give to non-DGR1 organisations, but very effective from a will perspective. Okay. Pretty sure this is my last slide. So our last point that I wanted to make is, well, what is our role? How do we engage with families? And again, we've touched on this numerous times today, but we have a governance, compliance, and administration role, and really arming our families with the information to make strategic decisions, helping them craft a giving strategy so that they can give with thought and purpose, providing them with our insights in terms of what we're hearing from you, from the sector, and ensuring they're being the best grant makers that they can be. And then really that last piece is really understanding what is their strategy, what are their values, and who are the best, who in the sector is the best fit for those clients. And that's definitely the joy of my job, is being able to understand a family story, understand their why, and being able to connect them with the right beneficiary to hopefully create a long-term, fruitful, impactful relationship. And that is the end of our presentation for today. So what I might do is invite Wynne. Wynne has just joined the Active Philanthropy team, and she will be helping me curate some Q&A if we've got any questions online.
Thank you, Denise. We actually don't have any questions so far,
No
but
questions.
It could be because you did an amazing job of stepping through the slides. But we do have time, so just in case anybody...
time. We've got 6 minutes, so we've got a range of people on the line, a number of familiar faces, which is great to see. Was there? Surely I didn't cover everything. Come on, people. Okay, we might wait a few. But let me just see what else I've got in my deck. But no, it was definitely wonderful to I think Philanthropy Meets Parliament. It was definitely my first summit. So Philanthropy Meets Parliament is the alternate to the conference. Philanthropy Australia will be meeting in Adelaide next year for their conference, and it was really a great opportunity to hear from government, both sides of government. The independents were also there, the Greens, and I think the commitment to the sector, it was consistent. They were all wanting to be there for the sector to really increase giving. And there was a definite shift in commitment in terms of wanting to back measurement, wanting to back evaluation. As we know, and Minister Lee is a massive advocate of randomized trials. I think he inserts it into every single speech that he does. But yeah, really wonderful to see that they're putting money behind evaluation as well. Okay. Yeah, so we've got a great question from Melanie around organisation versus program and tied income to programs. We are definitely, and to my point earlier, that probably 80% of our philanthropists are giving to general charitable purposes, which is effectively untied. Some of that is reflective of the fact that they're probably giving in smaller amounts. So they might be giving a couple of $1,000 as opposed to six-figure donations. We do find that there is a little bit more tied income, as in, I want to fund XYZ program, and that tends to be at the higher dollar amounts. But it really does. But I do find that once that relationship-based experience does tend to create more opportunities for untied income, because it's that commitment to the organisation, commitment to that theory of change, or the way that an organisation is doing something. And that also involves in time. So we do actually have examples where a client will fund a program first to almost test the organisation, and then off the back of that, switch more to untied contributions. We've got a question here around strategies for a new CEO and how to best introduce to philanthropists. Always a tricky one, but always a great opportunity to create engagement, because sometimes we need a reason to reach out to someone and say, hey, but I actually think it's a great learning opportunity. It's philanthropists, hey, use the opportunity to stroke their egos a little bit, as doesn't quite help with the power and balance piece, but it's a great opportunity to say, hey, I'm new here. You've potentially been engaging with us longer than I have. What do you love about us? How do you want us to engage with you? And have a two-way flow of information. I think it's a great opportunity, and we're always great advocates of creating opportunities for our clients to engage with their chosen beneficiaries. And anything we can do to help you, then definitely reach out. And but whether it's a closed webinar, so it might be a group of 30 people, or a small intimate lunch, but there are a lot of families out there that want to know more. They want to know how you as a new leader is going to take the organisation to new heights. Okay, Wynne, I might need to, I've lost track of the Q&A, so I might need you to...
That's all right. So Anna asked, you mentioned that there are less givers, but more giving, I guess, like the more going post-COVID.
Yeah, definitely.
So is it the giving related to health improvements for people and better health outcomes, or what are some of the trends that we've seen in terms of cause areas?
Yeah, I was going to include it in this deck, but didn't. But we're definitely seeing we obviously saw animals, environment and conservation causes increase during the bushfires, but there is a definitely increase of focus on social welfare. So that disadvantage, that giving to offset the cost of living crisis, we are seeing that trend. There is a great slide in John McLeod's recent report. So definitely I would direct you to that report to give some insight on what are some of those cause areas that are, and they do a really good slide around the increase of percentages from year to year.
Do we have time for a couple more? Just a couple more.
Yeah, let's grab one or two.
Sure. So David's asked how the returns have gone over the past year and how we're looking for 2024. And the last part is how the ethical fund is performing.
Yep. So I unfortunately won't be able to comment on the ethical fund. So that's definitely a question for Harman and Grant Mundell offline. But and they'll probably speak to just the returns. But we are anticipating the dividend income to drop a little bit. So we're factoring that into our cash flows. But we've just pulled the numbers for the Equity Trustees Charitable Foundation. And while the 1 to 3 month wasn't great, the 1 and 3 year returns have been absolutely fantastic. So we invest for the long term. So we are looking to ride out any of these little bumps. But yeah, definitely a question to direct to Parman and Grant Mundell offline.
And then very last question from Martin. With regard to the intergenerational wealth transfer, is there evidence around the generations shifting the focus of their giving?
Most definitely. So there's Martin and I will offline share some of the and I might share it also to the group. Some of the great reports coming out of more strategic. So they do it's actually quite reasonable, some of the additional consulting support that they provide to organizations around brand and giving and donor sentiments. But definitely a climate, mental health, all of those things, which we are starting to see through with our active philanthropists now. But yeah, there's definitely a shift in generation 2 and how they're giving, but also a really interesting trend around the rise of direct giving. So not necessarily giving through structured give vehicles, but things like GoFundMe pages and that being a channel for young people to demonstrate their philanthropy. So that's been definitely one to watch from our perspective, given structured giving is our bag, but a really interesting trend to watch in terms of how they're engaging with the sector. Fantastic. Thank you, Wynne, for curating that, and wonderful to be joined by everyone today. Hopefully you found that useful. My details are on screen if you know how to reach me if you've got any further questions after this session. But thank you again, and we'll see you next time.